Hi and welcome to episode 3 of Gertie and me, my life with a circular sock knitting machine. In this short video I'm going to show you how to start making your first sock. That'll involve using your cast on bonnet if you have one. Do use my cast on bonnet because I find it a lot easier to start and a lot quicker to start using this than any other method. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so I'm going to assume that you already know how to thread your sock machine. What I'm going to do is I'm using my cast on bonnet that I got with my machine. This is actually for a 72 cylinder and the cylinder that I've got on here at the moment is a 64. You can see it just poking through there. The cast on bonnet has these small hooks and it's basically, if I just pop my hand behind there, it's basically just thread pulled up from the folded cuff of this cast on bonnet, and it's every other stitch has been pulled through. So what you then have to do is not get hooked on like that. What you need to do is hook one of these little loops on every other needle around your cylinder. So I'll start just here, and you can just do it with your fingers, you don't need to use anything else. And basically just hook every other loop. What I'm going to do is use, I've got a small crochet hook here that I use. This is just an Addy 1.5mm hook that you'll be able to see, and I just use that to hook the loops over the needles. Okay, so I've now hooked my cast on bonnet onto all of the needles in the up position. You can see that these here are in the down position, and that's because the yarn carrier is actually sat just here, so the needles are pushed down. So what you'd need to do is thread the machine and start knitting around these needles that are in the up position in order to then hook yarn onto these needles. So in case I didn't show before how to thread your machine properly, I'm just going to run through it now quickly for you. So this is the top of the machine here, and I just have some waste yarn that I'm using. So I'm going to hook it around the back of the machine through that loop, and then if you can see just here, all machines will differ but they will work in slightly the same way. I'm going to hook it round this small hook at the back here, and then there's a hole just here that I'm going to thread the yarn through, which is quite hard when you're trying to do it with one hand. And it then goes under this here. So let me just try and push that in there. Okay, it then goes under the brake arm here that moves up and down. So over the top of the brake arm here and under this part of the brake arm, and then through this top hole just here. Okay, so we'll follow the yarn down, and then if I focus on the yarn carrier for you, you can see here that this is where the yarn goes into the machine here and actually starts knitting your sock. So what you need to do is bring the yarn from the outside of the yarn carrier through the first hole, and again other machines may differ, and then mine does have a second aperture just here to feed the yarn through. So I'm just going to put it through that second hole and leave it dangling down into the machine. If I can just move this around here and zoom in a little so you can see what I'm doing. You can see that the yarn itself is coming through the back of the yarn carrier just here, and then through this hole just here, and is dangling down into the sock machine. So now we've got our waste yarn in here, we dangle it down. I've got about a 5 or 6 inch tail just down into the sock, and we're going to start cranking. Okay, so I've got my handle just here. If I just move you back slightly, you'll be able to see. So my handle's just here, So I'm going to move it around just so you can see what I'm doing. So now that the waste yarn is in and my sock is set up to start going, I'm just going to crank a few rows with the waste yarn. The waste yarn that I use tends to be the same weight as the yarn that I'm going to be using. So this is the yarn that I'm going to be using on the machine. And it's a 4-ply fingering weight. It's 425 meters per 100 grams, and that's exactly the same as this waste yarn that I'm using here in the background. So they're the same weight of yarn, which means that I can use my waste yarn to get the correct tension for my sock before I start knitting it. Okay, so I'm just going to crank a few rows and then check my tension. Okay, so what we've got here, I've cranked a couple of rows, and as you can see at the front just here, I forgot, cleverly, to hook the remaining stitches for the cast-on bonnet, but that's absolutely fine. You can just hook them over whenever you like. So we'll hook them over like that. And then this yarn here that missed stitches, I'm literally just going to pick that up and fold it inside. So it makes absolutely no difference at all. What you also need to do is put a little bit of tension on your yarn. So what I'm doing is, if I can zoom out and just show you. So my machine's set up here and my cast-on bonnet is out of the bottom of the machine. I'm just going to pull slightly, and if you can see, this cast-on bonnet is actually moving inside the machine. I'll move you closer. So when I put some tension onto the bottom of that cast-on bonnet, you can see it stretching down. So I'm pulling down a little and I crank a couple more rows. Okay. If it skips stitches, it's really not a problem when you're casting on for start. Okay, so we've got a few stitches going, a few rows of stitches going, and you can see now that I've got a good amount just here. So what I'm going to do now is hang my weights. And what you need to hang the weights on the bottom of your sock. My machine is an Erlbacher Gerhart Speedster. It comes with this silver buckle here. And this fits on the bottom of your cast-on bonnet, which I'll show you in a second. You then get a weight as well. If I can zoom out just so that you can see. You get a weight with a hook on the end, and this weight at the bottom is attached. And then you do get additional weights as well, so that you can alter the amount of tension that's placed on your sock. Okay, so now I'm just going to show you how to hang your weights properly on the bottom of your cast-on bonnet. Okay, so this is the bottom of my cast-on bonnet just here, and I'm just going to hang the weights. So I'm going to take my buckle and pop that on the bottom of my cast-on bonnet. And you can see that this buckle here actually moves. Let me just move that a second just so you can get a better view. Okay, so the buckle moves both ways. If you put it one way and put some weight on the buckle, it will slip off. If you turn it the other way and pull down, you can see that it actually grips the sock. So once that's on, I usually leave about 5 inches from the bottom of my machine, 4 or 5 inches, and then just hang one weight on for a start, just to see what kind of tension that gives me. Okay, so now I've got my weight hung on the bottom of my sock. I'm going to crank out a few more rows just to check that I'm happy with the tension with the waste yarn. And if you can see, as I'm cranking, the yarn's slipping back down the needles to sit on the top of the cylinder quite nicely, which means, for me at least, that the tension is quite nice. It's not going to be too tight, so I'm going to hang too many weights trying to keep the yarn pulled down on the cylinder, but also I don't want it so loose that there's it's providing a very stretched, gappy fabric. Okay, and that looks good enough to me. I'll just zoom in so that you can see the tension on the yarn. So it's giving a nice even tension, and I'm quite happy that that's pulled down quite nicely, but not too much. It's not overstretching the stitches, but the stitches are sitting nicely against the cylinder just here. So that's great. So what I'm going to do now is, if I just zoom out, I'm going to snip the waste yarn. Zoom out so you can see what I'm doing. I've got a little caddy here at the back that's full of all my tools. So I'm going to snip the waste yarn. I'm going to leave about a 5-inch tail on the waste yarn and snip it and leave it hanging in the machine and remove my waste yarn there. And then I'm going to get my working yarn, which is this lovely yellow yarn just here, and I'm going to sit that behind my machine and thread it in exactly the same way as I did before. And I'm going to pull the yarn back through. When I start cranking, I always start with the yarn carrier at about 4 o'clock. It's personal preference, but that's what I prefer to do. Then I always know where to finish around if I want to start a heel or something. So now we have 2 yarns in the carrier. If I can zoom in for you. So just here we've got 2 yarns. We've got the waste yarn, which is the blue, and we've got the new yarn, which for here is the pink speckled. And I've got, again, a good tail of the new yarn hanging down into my sock. And I'm just going to adjust my row counter, which is at the back of my machine just here, just to make sure that I'm counting my rows. And that just turns around like that. So I'm at 0 for rows, and now I'm going to start cranking my sock. So when I do my socks, I do a hanged hem, and that's basically a folded cuff. I crank out 30 rows before I actually hang the hem. So I'm just going to show you how to crank the 30 rows, and then in the next video I will show you how to set up your hung hem. Okay, so I've just cranked out 15 rows, and you can see that the tension is really nice and even on my sock, actually hanging into the sock machine. I'm really happy with that tension, so I will just carry on going up to 30 rows and cranking like that until I get to wanting to do my cuff. If you did want to just make sock tubes, all you would have to do from this point is carry on until you finished all of your main yarn colour, like I have here, and then pop in some more waste yarn like we did before, leaving a good 5-inch tail on the yarn that you're using at the moment, and using again maybe another 5 to 7-inch tail on the yarn that you're going to start working with. So join me in episode 4 to find out how to make yourself a hanged hem.